Okay, we'll jump right in. There's a lot of slides and a lot of information. This is the NSSAB Work Plan Item 1, provide a recommendation from a community perspective on potential verification strategies identified and or how these strategies may be implemented. The NSSAB recommendation is due no later than July of 2020. Okay, as I said, we've got a lot of information to go over. These are the primary areas we're going to cover. We're going to talk about the purpose and the objective of waste verification. We're going to talk about potentials for strengthening verification, kind of at a high level initially, and then we're going to talk a bit about how we've developed all this information that you're going to be reviewing and how we've evaluated this information. You're going to hear a lot this evening, and you're going to see a repeating slide about the verification elements, their programmatic, profile, and container. We have done comparisons between disposal sites, so Susan's talk was a great accompaniment to this because it builds on some of the information she already covered tonight. And the verification of planning a forecasted waste to decide what verification tools, techniques, and strategies work best, we need to understand the waste that our generating community is going to be shipping to us, and we spent a lot of time working on that. So we've done a historical analysis of waste categories and containers, and that becomes really important when you consider different technologies. And we'll talk about path forward. So what is verification? What is the purpose of verification? For the purposes of this presentation, verification is monitoring waste that comes in to the Nevada National Security Site Waste Acceptance Criteria. That is our guide for all generators that they have to adhere to. The WAC, which is how I'm going to refer to it the rest of the evening, the WAC provides the criteria to ensure the protection of workers and the public. If the generators adhere to the WAC, if their waste is adherent to the WAC, they will meet all the regulatory, health and safety, technical, and administrative requirements for programmatic, container, and profile certification. Generator programs and profiles are reviewed for WAC compliance. Generators are also required to certify that each and every container shipped to the NNSS is compliant with that WAC. So this has kind of become our emblem, this center circle. The NNSS waste acceptance criteria, the WAC, prescribes all the requirements. It takes those requirements from different sources. As Susan talked about, there are regulations, and that's not just limited to DOE or NRC. That includes Department of Transport regulations. It includes those hazardous waste regulations she talked about. The DOE orders. She went over in great detail how there are the DOE orders which set the criteria for each individual DOE waste disposal facility, including NNSS. As she said, each individual site has its own customized performance assessment, which leads to the documented safety analysis, which is very specific to that site, considering the geology, considering the rainfall, and everything that feeds into that. And lastly, we have permits and authorization. NDEP is here. We have a RCRA hazardous waste permit that NDEP oversees and ensures we adhere to the compliance. So we take all the pertinent and important elements from each of these areas, the DOE orders, the safety analysis, the permits and authorizations, and the regulations, and we distill them into this waste acceptance criteria. And generally, you can divide those requirements into 3 segments. The programmatic certification, and that is, does each site have a program put in place that controls the management of waste from its generation to its characterization, to its packaging, to its shipment. We want it to be consistent, we want it to be repeatable, and we want it to be auditable and fully recorded. So that's the whole program. So no matter what waste they generate that they are shipping to NNSS, they have to demonstrate those programmatic controls consistently. Second is the profile certification. So you have this whole universe of waste that a given site may produce. But as Susan said, you might have resins, you might have spent protective wear, you might have building debris. We want to know the specific characteristics for a given waste stream because, as she said, DOE sites have very diverse waste streams. So the way they relay the specific information to RWAP and to the regulators is through profiles, which give the characteristics for a given waste stream. So we evaluate a waste stream coming in under profiles, and we determine whether it's acceptable. Provided that that is acceptable, and we say, yes, we'll accept that waste, then we want to make sure each and every container related to each profile meets certain certification requirements. So those are the three main elements that we are responsible for, and we have to have verification strategies in place to make sure that each of those elements is robust and demonstrates due diligence that when that waste hits the road to come here, it's in alignment with the WAC and the specific profile. Really, what are we most interested in? What is the objective of verification? I kind of boiled it down to these, though while there's lots of other items that come into play. We want to know, when they give us a drum of waste, that the radionuclides present in that drum of waste are what they say they are, and they are present at the level that they say they are. We want to know what chemicals are present. There's two reasons. One, obviously, as Susan said, if there are certain hazardous constituents there, they come under different regulatory regimes, whether they have asbestos or PCBs or heavy metals. While there's the regulatory from the environmental protection, that's also very critical to the safe handling for the transport, the public handling, and the workers at the site. As I said, we want to know other hazards, not just whether it's mixed waste, but the PCBs and the asbestos. We want to ensure no prohibited items are present. So what is an example of a prohibited item? A pressurized cylinder. Even though the gas in it might not be hazardous, that pressurized cylinder can cause issues during transport or handling. So we are very concerned with prohibited items. And lastly, does this waste actually conform to what you told us it was going to be on that profile? We have to have confidence that you tell us and it is what you tell us. So, as Rob said, early last year, about this time last year, Navarro was tasked with evaluating the effectiveness of the current strategy and making recommendations regarding enhancements informed by safety considerations, the effectiveness. We didn't want to do something if we didn't think there was a benefit. Is it reliable? And is it affordable? So we did have to consider cost considerations. Then, unfortunately, in July of last year, the waste generator at Y12 made a notification that they had not properly characterized and presented on a waste profile the characteristics of some waste that they had shipped. It was a bad weekend. It was a very bad weekend. Obviously, the first thing DOE said was, okay, we want you to go back, do causal analysis along. Y12 also did their own causal analysis, and look for weaknesses in our verification program beyond what you've already identified. So this presentation reflects the information we had already identified, but I do want you to know that we have taken some lessons learned from the Y12 incident, and they have supported these recommendations you're going to see tonight. Okay, so how did we do this? We identified verification practices used by the industry, both programmatic, how do they evaluate that any given generator has controls in place, and for individual containers, what do they do, with the various sites? So we looked at 5 different disposal facilities. We looked at 2 commercial facilities. Susan said in her presentation that there were 2 commercial facilities that were allowed to take waste from all generators across the United States, provided that they meet their waste acceptance criteria, and that's EnviroCare of Utah and Waste Control Specialists of Andrews, Texas. So we looked at what they did. We looked at the one other DOE facility that takes from a lot of DOE waste sites, but I do want to say it's not a low-level facility. We looked at RWAP that accepts the transuranic waste because they have some really strong programs, and we wanted to see, what we could learn from them. Then we looked at 2 other DOE facilities dedicated for the disposal of on-site generated waste and waste within a given set of confines. We obtained preliminary implementation cost information for the verification activities. Obviously, that becomes very important to DOE on the funding. And we also did a preliminary data call to identify major types of waste that were going to be generated, anticipated to be generated through 2030 for determining the most applicable verification activities. So if the majority of waste you're going to receive is in a drum, you might have different verification techniques than if the majority of waste you receive is going to be in large cargo containers. So we wanted to understand, what are we going to be getting? Whoops. So with all that in mind, we dove in to look at the 3 segments. And again, you're going to see this over and over. So the first thing we said was, what about our programmatic verification? Verification checks of the generator waste certification program. Our programmatic verification is designed to be implemented before the waste ships. There's 2 real key elements to our verification program. And the first one is our on-site visits, our facility evaluations. We have the audits, and we talked earlier this evening about how we used a risk-informed schedule. And we also have surveillances. And surveillances are more targeted visits to these sites. And as we discussed earlier, we do have some areas that we think we can strengthen on those. Those are designed to monitor the programmatic controls. So for instance, when we go to a site and they have a drum, I'll just use a 55-gallon drum, we want to make sure that their controlled use of those drums, they have the programmatic controls, that they procure them, they store them, they manage them, they close them in a consistent manner. You can pull any thread, and we chase those threads down. The other key part of our programmatic verification is we require every generating site to identify a waste certification official. That waste certification official works for the generating site. There is an expectation that they are free from budget and schedule constraints, and they serve as our window into that organization. They are our eyes and ears, and they are the ones who monitor down to the container by container basis the certification of waste and the control of their programs. Waste certification declarations require that compliance be verified with documented processes and procedures. They have to have the programs in place. There is one other element, and it crosses over from programmatic into profile certification, and that is that we defined a waste acceptance review panel. That waste acceptance review panel includes all the members of RWAP. It also includes representatives from MSTS, Mark Krause's organization. Those are subject matter experts who consider the very specific requirements for the site. It includes DOE, and INDEP has full access to all of those reviews and has the opportunity to ensure that any questions they may have are addressed by that waste acceptance review panel. So that's where it's a programmatic element, but it's focused on that profile certification. So this is one of those things I thought you might want to tab. I suggested to Barb that we get the tabs because when you come to discussions, you might want to refer back to this. This is kind of a synopsis of the programmatic elements of verification: the facility evaluation program, the independent waste certification program, and the profile submission and review. So I want to talk a little bit about how this differentiated. The facility evaluation program is very strong and very regimented for NNSS. It is the only full audit program like this for low-level waste that goes and visits with a detailed audit of each facility. The two commercial facilities, because they have such a wide number of generators, they do not have an audit program that we have that looks at the 5 major elements: radioactive, characterization, chemical characterization, waste traceability, quality assurance, and transportation. And that is because they have so many different sites that may ship to them. They count on verification at the gate, which we'll talk about a little bit more. The on-site cells tend to be closely located to their generators and have a very controlled list of generators, so they don't have a broad programmatic facility evaluation program like we do either. The independent waste certification program, that is also unique to NNSS, and that is because we have a controlled number of generators, and we have the authority to be able to require sites that ship to us to set that program in place. Every site has a profile submission and review process. Doesn't matter if you're commercial, doesn't matter if you're just receive your own on-site waste, it doesn't matter if you're WIP, it doesn't matter if you're NNSS. All programs have a defined profile review process. That's not going away for anybody. You'll be able to reference this. We put some ranges on cost, and we said who actually funds things. So that'll help you hopefully with your discussions. This is a really key slide. Programmatic controls emphasize consistent waste characterization and management to ensure compliance prior to shipment. And it is always our hope that, well, it's more than our hope, it's our job to help ensure that the programs are in place to make sure this happens prior to shipment. The advantages, provided everything is adhered to, it offers the opportunities to identify weaknesses with waste, weaknesses with packages prior to transport. And I can tell you, as a former person in charge of delivering waste, I had a very independent waste certification official, and there was more than one container that we were ready to load. Someone would identify a dent or a misapplied gasket ring, pull it off the shipment. The whole goal was to make sure that from start to finish, before that got put on the truck, that all issues were identified to make sure it was in compliance and ready for the road. Generators are required to establish documented systems with evidence of implementation. They have to have these programs in place. They are quite extensive with the policies and procedures. Generators know they will be held accountable through on-site evaluations. Rob said it best. When do you clean house? When you know company's coming. They know we're coming. They know we come annually. And with these extensive programs, you can't wait till the last minute to try to get them back in place. They're very extensive. So having that audit program ensures that they are aware that they are going to be scrutinized and reviewed. One of the key things we've kind of focused in on this past year is using on-site evaluations that can be rapidly implemented based on issues or special waste. So in addition to the programmatic reviews, we try to keep the flexibility that if we have special waste of concern, that we can target our programmatic resources to go out and review it. So those are some of the advantages. What are the potential weaknesses? Well, unfortunately, those were demonstrated by Y12. There can be gaps in the flow of information to the waste certification officials. One of the things we are looking at is how strong is each waste certification official and how empowered are they by their sites. The other thing that we have found, and it was particularly contributing to the Y12 instance, is security and classification requirements can impede the transfer of critical data. We recognize this is a weakness. We are working to ensure that we always are getting sufficient information on a timely basis, recognizing the security and classification can sometimes impede the visibility of information. So what are our broad recommendations? We are discussing improving the tools for facility evaluations. We've already worked on new lines of inquiry, which are more intensive checklists to guide us to do more intensive questionings during these facility evaluations. As I said before, we need to ensure that the WCO at each site is empowered and their clear need to know is supported by the highest levels of management. And as one of the other things, as we spoke out in the other briefing, we're looking at the potential of using DOE personnel to do unannounced, and we're developing that program. We think all of these are really going to strengthen the programmatic certification. And the last thing is, as a result of the Y12 incident, the headquarters, Washington, instructed the headquarters Office of Enterprise Assessment, which is required, which oversees several aspects of the entire DOE enterprise, to review waste management practices across the board. And that's not just inclusive of waste coming to NNSS. That's all waste managed on DOE sites. As part of that, that organization has been shadowing us, and we're shadowing them. It's a great information exchange with a lot of very, very senior people, and we hope to take some lessons learned from that to further strengthen the program. Okay, so that is programmatic verification, and I'll just say one more time, NNSS puts a lot of emphasis on programmatic verification, more so than the commercial sites, and more than the on-site sites. Profile verification. If you'll remember, I told you you got this whole universe of waste on a given site. What waste stream do you want to send to us? Because it might be all the debris from a takedown of a facility. It might be the process residues from an on-site processing. It might be laboratory residuals. DOE has a hugely complex variety of waste, as Susan said. So this profile is where we get the specific information. They are generated by the generators. They prepare them for each waste stream proposed for disposal at NNSS. The pertinent information includes the radionuclides and concentration amounts, the chemical characteristics and regulatory categorization, the generating description and physical form, and the packaging and shipping specifications. So if you get the radiochemical concentrations and amounts, and you get the chemical right, and you know what the characteristics of the waste is physically, then you get the packaging and shipping correct. If you get either of the first two wrong, you'll probably get the packaging and shipping wrong. This is really the crux of the matter of being able to determine whether that waste that is coming is NNSS WAC compliant, which is the whole goal. Profiles are submitted for review by the RWAP, that expansive panel I talked about, and the RWAP makes a recommendation to DOE-EM Nevada whether to approve that waste stream or whether to go back and seek additional information. Or sometimes we tell the generators that waste is just not going to come. It is not acceptable. I will tell you that the EM Nevada program and the oversight also from NNSA, that they give us pushback. They ensure that we have been quite interrogating with those profiles. Waste profiles are used by all radioactive disposal sites, and I already stated that. What are the advantages? Our profile review process allows for EM Nevada program WARP, inclusive of RWAP and disposal operations, NNSA, and NDEP, to submit comments that the generator must reconcile before the waste can be approved. This is such a key element, and we know that this is where we had a failure. So we have to be really honest about our weaknesses. And we realize that our current profile template has resulted in inconsistent level of detail among generators. So we're really working to see how do we extract the information better. The recommended enhancements include requiring the generators to use the new lines of inquiry, which will force out the documentation of more information and the source of information that are the foundation of that profile. and also targeting on-site verifications, and I chose that word specifically, verifications, as part of the profile review process prior to approval. So you submit the profile with the information. Up to this point, that has been a review strictly within Nevada, considering the information. What we're looking at now is, prior to approval, for certain higher risk waste, or if we do not believe that the information is quite as formulated as we like, we are recommending that a potential enhancement is actually traveling to the site and verifying all the information prior to approval of that profile. That would be a major difference on what we've done to date. Container verification. This is where I think the NSSAB might have the most interest. This is truly where the waste hits the road. There are different tools and techniques that can be used to verify individual containers to make sure that they conform to the waste profile. The most common of these include visual verification, just what it says, where you go out and you visually observe the waste, you visually observe it being packaged. The NSSAB has had representatives on some of our visual verification visits. Real-time radiography. This is basically X-raying the containers. We have the capability at Area 5 where we receive waste. The MSTS personnel actually operate the equipment. Personnel in RWAP review the films, review the actual containers in real time, and look for prohibited items. Waste sampling and analysis. And I put fingerprinting there because there's two uses of waste sampling and analysis. A generator may take samples of a waste and analyze them for radionuclides and analyze them for chemicals, and that is the basis of the information they put on a profile. When we say fingerprinting, we mean that NNSS collects split samples, collects duplicate type samples from the waste, and we run them independently through an independent laboratory to confirm that the information provided by the generator can be verified through sample analysis fingerprinting. Non-destructive radiological analysis. That is used by several sites. We do not use it currently at NNSS. What non-destructive assay is the use of a piece of equipment. You put either a whole piece of equipment or a drum or a box in there, and you have a target radionuclide that you can measure. And from that target radionuclide, you may have what they call scaling factors, which are other related radionuclides. Those tend to be employed on a site or under the TRUE program, and there's a reason for each, and a reason why it's not very practicable for NNSS. You have to know your key radionuclides you are looking at. I came from a site, Portsmouth, where the key radionuclide was uranium. It did not vary. It was uranium. Everything we had was based off of uranium. So we had a measure for U-235, and we could scale in. We had great process knowledge to tell us what the other nuclides would be. If you have only transuranic waste, there are different transuranic nuclides that you can use to scale off of. The reason it's not practicable for NNSS is because we take a wide variety of waste, from national laboratories to defense sites to former gaseous diffusion sites, and they all have different nuclides, and it's a very sensitive system to set up. So we do not employ that at NNSS. I will tell you, we do have several generators that use that and use it on each container or each piece of equipment. But that's I wanted to give you the full picture of the verification techniques. And the last one is radiological scanning. And that's a very gross indicator. As you see from the picture, when we receive containers out at the site, they go up in survey. Only if they discover a gross measure of energy where it's not expected to be, would that provide an indication that something is wrong. It gives you no indication of the nuclides present, and it is only qualitative or semi-quantitative to the level of activity. We will always scan, though. Every disposal site uses it. It can't really be a real strong verification program. It's an indicator. Here's just some pictures. We talked about the real-time radiography. That is actually out at Area 5. That is some waste that was received. The fingerprinting, that's actually taking the samples. I think I've covered most of this, but again, I wanted you to have a table that you could easily reference for your discussions. So I think I've covered all this information, so I'm not going to spend any more time on that. Container verification. The advantages, it's scalable to risk. If you know that you have a high activity container that is close to limits, you can scale up. If we've had a generator that we've had issues with, we can up the number of their containers we pull to have RTR. It validates the effectiveness of the generator processes and procedures. So we will, next week, we're going to RTR some containers that we know that are supposed to contain soil. Well, when you RTR a container with soil in it, you can't really see much because it's very dense, and so it looks like, can't really tell much. But that's very important because it verifies for us that it is what they say it is. So it gives us a validation if what is presented on that visual widely or aligns with what they've told us on the profile that it's going to be. It's flexible for some approaches to be used prior to shipment. So if you use sampling and analysis for fingerprinting, you've got two approaches. You can either do it upon receipt, but what we think is much more effective is to do it prior to shipment. And that way you have confirmation before that waste ever gets put in public transport that it is what it says it is. So you've got different flexibility to do some things on-site and to do some things off-site. Potential weaknesses. If we load all of our verification upon receipt, then we don't catch anything until upon receipt. This is one of the key differences between NNSS and the two commercial facilities. The two commercial facilities put almost all the emphasis upon receipt. They have programs set up to sample a percentage of every container. But when they find it, it's already been put on the road. They also have treatment capabilities, so having used to have worked for one of them, they actually kind of like it because they end up making more money because they treat it upon receipt. Some waste is not amenable to sampling, such as large metal components. There's just metal components, not easy to take a sample. RTR is not that effective. So there's some that just aren't very amenable to sampling. RTR is limited for dense materials. We talked about the soils. I used the soil example. It's even more than that. Some of the subcomponents that were shipped may have very heavy outer casings. RTR will not allow you to see what's inside of those. Security and classification requirements inhibit visual verification at generator sites. So we're limited on how we can do the visual verifications, and no current capabilities upon receipt at NNSS. At this point in time, we do not open containers upon receipt. Right now, at this time, RTR is not executed on classified material. So, I've been talking about this as we've been going. I'll try to give a brief synopsis. DOE on-site disposal. The number of generators they have are restricted. You saw in Susan's presentation, the Hanford site can only take from a compact given area. Savannah River is limited from where they can take waste. On-site disposals sometimes are even limited down to that given site. Program verification varies on how much they do. A lot of them have open disposal, so they do visual at the point they dump. They do not generally do chemical verification of container contents at disposal. It's upstream. They do not generally offer services for treatment. They have very limited radionuclides that they accept, and the activity varies. For commercial, if you meet the WAC, meet their WAC, there's no restriction. So the commercial sites, in addition to supporting DOE and hospitals and NRC power plants, also support universities. Universities generate radioactive waste of various types. They support the EPA on cleanup activities. They support the military. So they have a large number of generators. They do not emphasize programmatic verification because they have so many generators. They do focus their verification upon receipt, and if it is sampleable material, they do sample it on a percentage. They maintain services for treating non-conforming waste, which allows them, when they receive something that's non-conforming, to treat it and not have to put it back on the road, which is a huge plus to the public and the environment. They receive a lot of diverse radionuclides, but they have lower activity limits, and I think Susan spoke to that. If a waste is received that is non-compliant, the generator is held responsible by their state for a non-compliance. DOE limited access facility, and here I've got NNSS. Waste generators are limited. It's a lot more than some of the sites, but it's way less than the commercial sites. We currently have right at 25 active generators. We perform on-site verification of profiles. We've been doing it post-approval. We're looking at doing it for some pre-approval. We have limited container verification upon receipt, and that is via RTR. If it comes in a 55-gallon drum or it comes in a B25 style box, which is a 4x4x6 metal box, we can RTR it. If it's some of the larger containers, we can't. We do not have treatment services at the site at this time. We do receive diverse nuclides, and our activities are higher than you generally see on the commercial sites. And then the other limited access, and I put it up here, but it's such a totally different program because it is transuranic waste. But the waste generators are more limited. They have verification of profiles. They do their verification of prohibited items prior to receipt. They have no opening capabilities in general there. They also do a verification of radioactivity prior to receipt. It's transuranic waste. It's higher activity. It's a higher risk to the workforce. So again, here's a table, synopsis, that you might want to refer back to, so that's what your blue tabs are for. And it kind of shows you exactly how the uses for the verification strategies. So, we've gone through all the strategies. It's a lot. What about our waste? What about our site and planning? So, I'll go through this quick. We assessed waste forecasted for disposal to determine the best verification techniques, and this is on the container basis, not the programmatic, not the profile. We asked for their forecast. We also reviewed 4 years' worth of NNSS waste receipts to determine the percentage of waste types received. We used the information to assess the applicability of container verification strategies. So what kind of waste do we get? 70% by volume, and this is based on that 4-year review, is equipment, compactables, and debris. 20% is soils, particulates, and filters, and another 5% is sludges and solidified waste. The reason why I have those two italicized, those are the types of material that are amenable to fingerprinting, to sampling and analysis and fingerprinting. The equipment, compactable, and debris is not amenable to sampling. Sources, and these are radioactive sources, they're very well known and understand waste. That's less than 1% by volume. Asbestos, everybody knows what asbestos is, that's less than 1% by volume. Asbestos is another thing you would never ever sampling, and you never want to breach those containers for worker safety. And then we receive 5% classified. That may be equipment, compactable, and debris, or it may be the material amenable to sampling. So this material, the stuff that's amenable to sampling, is not really a good RTR candidate because it tends to be dense in the containers. The other material, the equipment, compactable, and debris, is a good RTR candidate if it's in the right container. It's also a good visual candidate. So what kind of containers do we get? Fortunately for us, 65% of the containers are amenable to RTR. That's either drums or those boxes that I talked about that are about 4x4x6. Approximately 22% are soils predominantly packaged in soft-sided containers. We cannot RTR those, they don't fit, but we can fingerprint. About 3% of waste arrives in cargoes, the large, Sealands back of the 18-wheeler. Those are where we have been focusing our visual reviews because we don't have the RTR capabilities at this time, and because they tend to be debris and compactable waste. They're not very good for sampling. How do you go about sampling? If you took all this furniture and crushed it up, it's just really hard to sample. So that kind of gave us an idea of what waste we have and what containers and what's amenable to the different techniques. So with that, I've given you lots of information, and as Rob said, we are going to give you guys the opportunity to discuss it afterwards. I have what we put down for recommendations. I think we've talked about the 3 key areas: programmatic, profile, container. All 3 key areas we believe are critical to ensuring NNSS WAC compliance. Program and profile verification improvements will be implemented. As Rob said, we have an entire listing. At this point in time, there is no desire to not continue with our programmatic controls because we believe those are very critical. So the future enhancements that we're really kind of focused on tonight are in those container verification strategies. When I talk about our recommendations, I'll hit all 3, programmatic, profile, and container, but the container ones where we're really focusing a lot of that's where we have the most questions. So we'll be interested to see what comes up.
Yeah, my question is why is classified not verifiable, and is it important to be verified?
Yes. The answer to the second question is definitely. At this point in time, arrangements for classified waste, there are certain key controls that have to be put in place for the management of the information that is obtained, and to ensure that the persons who can review that via RTR or visual verification, but primarily with the RTR, have the proper credentials. And the management of that information, as everyone can appreciate, and I respect and appreciate, has a lot of rules for management. We have not established those programs yet. But my opinion is, yes, it's very important.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Anthony?
Right, so my question was, for acceptance purposes, what's the difference between a sludge and a thick liquid?
A sludge and a thick
Between
liquid?
a sludge versus a thick liquid.
Golly, I don't know if there is a technical or regulatory definition on that. Sludges are a hard item. A thick liquid or sludge, anything that, and sludges become difficult because you have dewatered sludges with water. We do have controls. We are not allowed to take free liquids. So any liquids, either present in a sludge or a thick liquid, would have to be solidified prior to submission. But regardless, they are all amenable to sampling. So I think that's the key that we really want to get across, is some of these materials right now, I didn't say this, and I should have, my apologies. Right now, the WAC does not have specificity that you have to sample. We have allowed generators to use process knowledge of their systems that generate the waste. And that is something we're looking at. So, and it really comes into play with waste like sludges.
Okay. Earlier, Dick Twitty on the phone had a question. Do you still have that question, Dick Twitty, or was your question answered during Marilew's briefing?
Thanks, Barb. I couldn't tell who was. It's been difficult to hear because The voice sounds like whoever's talking is in a barrel, and I know it's because of the room. I don't have a question per se, but I have some comments. And I don't need an answer on these comments. I just want to get them out. I will also type them up either tonight or tomorrow and send them to you in an email.
Thank you.
But let me say this. It appears that we're looking for several levels of verification, particularly for profiles and acceptance of the waste. Unfortunately, the profiles and the containers are separate issues. Hopefully, this revised program will detail how the multi-layer checks are accurate consistently, and I think that's been our continuous problem. I have to assume that the programmatic certifications, the container certifications, or profile certifications are all supposed to come together, but hopefully the program will detail in here the training certifications, records, overview by QA and QC. Each program needs that kind of activity. And I'm not certain about the waste certification official. At first I thought this was something new, but it appears by Marilew's talk that this is something that's already in place. And I said, my question is, what does this person do, and how are they qualified? And I assume that the new program will see some documental programs and procedures for this particular official, because it seems to me that this is the individual who can really help assure that the program's working together between the profiles and the package. Will that WCO be involved somehow, somewhere in the profile verification and the packaging? I think Navarro has done an excellent job putting this program together, and the recommendations all look good. However, I'd like to see more of the details. I assume we'll be seeing the upcoming verification strategy, which sounds good, but really relies on the WCO, I believe. And then I think the last thing I said is, well, just that it's a good program so far, but and the recommendations are good, but I think we need to see more details. And that's all I got.
Thank you. I do want to hit on a couple of the points you made. You're absolutely correct. The waste certification official is not a new program. It has been a key part of this program, and yes, we have reviewed the tools that we provide to those waste certification officials. So there's two key areas to making sure that they can do their job appropriately. One is providing them with additional training and tools to be able to ensure a more consistent implementation across the 25 generators. And secondly is ensuring that on each site where they operate that they have the support of the senior management to ensure that their role is not compromised by schedule or budget. We're always mindful of that. And I guess I would add the last thing, they really become critical on these classified wastes where key information transfers are difficult, and we rely heavily on them to ensure that the appropriate information. They are a part of all profiles submitted. They do review those. But I appreciate you recognizing that important role, and yes, we definitely recognize that we need to ensure that we are getting them tools to ensure consistency across the board.
Thanks, Marilew. And also, I guess I would suggest that the enhanced authorizations for the WCO should be able to, without going through a lot of process, bring in expertise if they think they need it.
Agreed. And it's really interesting. These sites, as Susan said in her earlier presentation, these are incredibly diverse sites. And we have to make sure we recognize the challenges from the diversity of sites. I came from a decommissioning project. Well, it was pretty easy. We knew what nuclides we had. We knew what the place did. It enriched uranium. That's all they did. We had a laboratory. That was a little tricky, but all in all, we knew what it was. These waste certification officials who work for national laboratories where those scientists go do lots of weird stuff, they have a very, very difficult job. So we are recognizing that, and one of the other things we're doing is we're trying to target those categories of generators to ensure that they are sharing lessons learned. That's a huge outcome from the Y12 situation. The Y12 plant has a sister plant in Texas called Pantex near Amarillo. They basically had the same waste. They weren't sharing information. So one was handling it one way, one was handling it another way. And we recognize we are in a unique position to facilitate sharing of information and lessons learned across these groupings of generators. I mean, we have learned so much, and we have recognized so many opportunities for improvement, and I'm excited for going forward to really bring this up, because I will agree with one thing you said. Y12 did really kick a lot of us, so we are looking to ensure that this program is as robust as it can be.
Thank you, Marilew. Good presentation.
This is Dick Stevens. I wonder if I could add a couple of things.
Go ahead.
Just to kind of pick up on what Dick was saying, I guess I'm concerned as much as far as programmatic verification with the human element and how extensively that we go into review of training records, of medical information, of the reliability of the humans that are involved with touching, moving, who do the work or direct the work that is being done with the transport of waste. The drivers, for example, do we have assurance of those drivers' reliability?
Okay.
And it's something I would recommend be considered.
Okay, thank you. I'll address that. You're absolutely right. The control of any waste package is only as good as the person putting that waste in the package, which is not people like me who sit behind a desk. It's guys out there in the either 90-degree temperature or the 30-degree temperature. We do require that every site, generating site, has a program where they, all employees who come in contact with waste that will be packaged for NNSS have to be trained and briefed on the NNSS WAC requirements. We do verify that training when we go to the sites. We pull it for various operators and confirm that they have up-to-date training. That said, there's always room for improvement. And one of the key elements that I mentioned earlier, the Office of Enterprise Assessment is doing a review at the direction of headquarters. One of the things they've challenged us on is how much we, when we go do our facility evaluations, actually go and talk to that generator in the field. So that is something we are reviewing, you know, beyond reviewing their training records, really talk to them and find out what difficulties they face and kind of suss out how comfortable they are with the controls and requirements. I want to specifically address your question regarding the transport. There are only a certain number of transporters that are accepted by the Department of Energy to transport radioactive waste, low-level waste. Those drivers have all been vetted, and they all have a Class 7 endorsement on their CDL. Prior to transport of any shipment to NNSS, each driver is thoroughly briefed. They've already been vetted. They're thoroughly briefed on the requirements for transport of that waste beyond DOT. Obviously, they have to meet DOT. They are also briefed on the requirements for shipping waste and arriving at the NNSS site. They are briefed on the prohibited areas for travel, and they are also briefed on notifications above and beyond what are required by the law, but we require for those drivers. I actually think that's one of the strongest elements of the program is the drivers. So
I was just going to do, well, you guys can read it yourself, but this is the EM Nevada program's path forward. So they're going to get NDEP's and the NSSAB's recommendations or their input, and then Navarro will finalize their verification strategy report and then provide it to EM Nevada program, and they'll make a determination on the final verification strategy.